Evil was not born in the fires of hell. It did not crawl out of a primal abyss or manifest as a shadow in the night. True darkness descended from the absolute highest peak of perfection. We are conditioned to believe that the devil is a monster, a grotesque beast of brimstone and hate. But we forget the terrifying truth that the original face of evil was not a nightmare. It was the most beautiful thing existence had ever seen. Before the war that shattered the cosmos, before the corruption of mankind, there was only light. And in the center of that light stood a being so flawless, so radiant, and so magnificent that his very perfection became the seed of his own destruction. This is not just a story about a rebellion or a fallen king. It is the tragedy of the first ego, a cautionary tale that suggests the line between divinity and damnation is thinner than a razor's edge. But before we reach the fiery end, we must understand how the brightest star in the heavens collapsed into a black hole that would threaten to swallow God himself. Long before the concept of time began to tick, before the earth was formed from dust and void, the biblical creator fashioned the heavens. Within this celestial architecture, God populated his kingdom with cherubs, seraphim, and angels. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the archangels, the chief messengers and warriors of the divine will. Yet among this elite order, there was one who outshone them all. His name was Lucifer. In the ancient texts, he is described not as a soldier, but as a masterpiece. Ezekiel portrays him as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. He was the anointed cherub that covereth, a being who walked amidst the fiery stones of the holy mountain. Imagine a creature woven from the very fabric of morning light, a being whose presence commanded the awe of the entire angelic host. He was the favorite. He was the standard by which all other creations were measured. For eons, Lucifer existed in a state of absolute glory, arguably understanding the mind of God better than any other entity in existence. But it was this proximity to the throne, this intimacy with power, that would eventually poison his mind. In the silence of eternity, a thought began to take root in Lucifer's consciousness. It was not a sudden explosion of hatred, but a slow, creeping realization born of narcissism. As he looked upon his own splendor, the adoration of the lower angels, and the power surging through his form, he began to question the hierarchy. If he was perfect in his ways, as God had declared, then why should he serve? Why should he bow? The scripture in Isaiah captures this chilling internal monologue, where the created being dares to dream of displacing the Creator. "I will ascend into heaven," he whispered to the silence. "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High." This was the birth of pride, the primordial sin. Lucifer's ambition was not merely to be free, it was to be supreme. He did not want to leave God's house. He wanted to evict the landlord and take the deed for himself. It is a terrifying realization that the first enemy of God did not come from outside, but from the very inner circle of the divine court. Lucifer possessed an intellect far superior to his peers, and he used this brilliance to weaponize his charisma. He began to move among the angelic ranks, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He sowed seeds of doubt, whispering that their potential was being stifled by an authoritarian ruler. He leveraged his beauty and his status to manipulate the celestial host, convincing them that he, the most perfect of them all, was the rightful ruler of the cosmos. Slowly, the harmony of heaven fractured. A third of the angels, entranced by Lucifer's light and blinded by his promises, turned their backs on their Creator. They pledged their loyalty to the usurper, failing to realize that his light had become a cold, artificial glare. The stage was set for a cataclysm that would tear the fabric of reality apart. Lucifer, emboldened by his army, launched an all-out assault on the throne of God. But the usurper had miscalculated. He had mistaken his own grandeur for omnipotence. As the rebellion surged, it was met not by God himself, who remained so far above the conflict that he need not lift a finger, but by another archangel, Michael. The name Michael literally translates to "who is like God," a direct challenge to Lucifer's arrogance. The war that followed was not merely a clash of swords, but a collision of wills that shook the foundations of the heavens. It was here, in the face of true divine resistance, that Lucifer's facade of perfection began to crack. Unable to defeat Michael, the beautiful morning star twisted into something else entirely. Revelation describes this metamorphosis in horrifying detail. The angel of light became the great dragon, a serpent of rage and malice. This transformation reveals a profound truth. Evil is not a creative force, it is a corruption. Lucifer could not create a new kingdom, he could only distort the one he was in. The defeat was absolute. The dragon and his angels fought, but they could not prevail. There was no longer any place found for them in heaven. In a moment of cosmic justice, the being who wanted to rise above the stars was cast down to the lowest depths. Luke recounts the words of Jesus, describing the event with terrifying brevity. "I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven." It was a violent, instantaneous expulsion. Stripped of his office, his glory, and his home, Lucifer plummeted. He was no longer the light-bringer. He was the adversary. He became Satan. The psychological horror of this fall is unimaginable. To go from the pinnacle of creation, the sun of the morning, to a banished exile in the darkness, is a torture that fueled an eternal vendetta. He lost everything because he could not accept being second. Lucifer, now Satan, would not fade quietly into the void. If he could not strike God directly, he would strike at what God loved most. His eyes turned toward a new creation, a fragile species molded from dust but bearing the breath of the divine. Mankind. In the Garden of Eden, we see the continuation of his war. While Genesis speaks of a crafty serpent, later theology and the writings of Revelation identify this manipulator as the ancient devil. He slithered into paradise not with force, but with the same weapon he used in heaven: ideas. He offered Eve the same poison he had swallowed himself, the promise of godhood. "Ye shall be as gods," he hissed. It was the projection of his own failed ambition onto humanity. By corrupting Adam and Eve, Lucifer achieved a petty, bitter victory. He marred the masterpiece of his enemy, dragging humanity into the same mortality and misery that now defined his own existence. However, there is a fascinating historical mystery buried beneath this theological epic. When we peel back the layers of translation, we find that the name Lucifer is Latin, meaning light-bringer or morning star, a reference to the planet Venus. But the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The original Hebrew text in Isaiah refers to Helel ben Shahar, the shining one, son of the morning. Many scholars argue that Isaiah was not originally writing about a fallen angel at all, but was composing a satirical poem about a mortal Babylonian king. This king, drunk on power, had persecuted Israel and believed himself to be a god, only to die and rot in the dirt like any other man. The theory suggests that early Christian scribes and translators, specifically Saint Jerome, took this taunt against a Babylonian tyrant and wove it into the existing mythology of the fallen angel, creating the composite character of Lucifer we know today. It raises a haunting question. Is the story of Lucifer a divine revelation? Or is it the ultimate example of history mythologizing the hubris of a human king? Regardless of whether Lucifer is a literal fallen angel or a metaphor born from the arrogance of Babylonian monarchs, the moral weight of the story remains crushing. It is the archetypal tragedy of pride. It echoes in Proverbs. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Lucifer represents the ultimate danger of unchecked ego. He had everything, beauty, power, status, but it wasn't enough because he wasn't the absolute center. His story forces us to look into the mirror. It serves as a grim reminder that intelligence and beauty are not safeguards against evil. In fact, they can be the very catalysts for it. The brightest lights cast the deepest shadows. Lucifer's fate is sealed in the lake of fire, a final destination of torment where the beast and the false prophet shall be. But until that final day, the spirit of the morning star persists, a wandering ghost of arrogance, seeking to whisper the same old lie into the ears of anyone who will listen, that you are more than you are, and that you deserve to sit on the throne of God. The story of Lucifer is not just a chapter in a religious text. It is a psychological blueprint of destruction. It reveals that the desire for absolute power is a suicide mission. By trying to become everything, Lucifer became nothing. By trying to ascend above the clouds, he was cast into the pit. And as he roams the earth, stripped of his halo but retaining his intellect, he serves as a living warning. The war in heaven may be over, but the war for the mind continues. Every time we choose arrogance over humility, every time we believe we are the sole architects of our reality, we are walking the same path that turned the most beautiful angel into the most hideous monster. The lightning is still falling, and the question remains, will we learn from the fall, or are we destined to crash and burn in the same spectacular fashion? Here is the subversive truth that most people miss when they hear the story of the fall. We like to think of Lucifer as the bad guy, and Michael as the good guy, a simple binary of light versus dark. But the terrifying irony is that Lucifer was the most perfect being ever created. He wasn't flawed goods. He was the peak of design. This implies that the capacity for ultimate evil is inherent in ultimate perfection. The flaw wasn't a mistake. The flaw was a feature of free will. Lucifer represents the dangerous reality that brilliance without humility is just a high-speed crash waiting to happen. The twist isn't that a monster attacked heaven. It's that the best of heaven became the monster. It forces us to realize that evil isn't an external invader. It's an internal rot that starts at the very top. Look at the world you live in today. We are currently living in the Age of Lucifer, not in a religious sense, but in a psychological one. Social media, corporate climbing, the obsession with personal branding, it is all built on the Luciferian algorithm. I will ascend. I will be like the Most High. Look at me. We reward the narcissist. We worship the disruptor who breaks the rules just to prove they can. You see this story playing out every day in the collapse of tech moguls, the fall of celebrities, and the destruction of leaders who began to believe their own hype. You are watching the fall happen in real time, over and over again, on your smartphone screen. We are all little Lucifers, convinced we are the main character of the universe, unaware that this specific type of pride always ends in a crash. So, this leaves you with a binary choice, a question that defines your trajectory. Do you choose the path of the service, accepting that you are part of a greater whole, finding peace in connection and humility? Or do you choose the path of the throne, where you are the absolute ruler of a lonely, burning kingdom? You can be a servant in a garden of peace, or a king in a wasteland of ash. The choice seems obvious, yet history shows we almost always choose the ash. If you want to survive the next era, you need to understand the monsters that came before it. Subscribe now, because in the next file, we are going to dig up an entity that makes Lucifer look like a rebellious child, a primordial force that terrified even the gods of Babylon. You don't want to face that alone.